Well, whenever possible, like in the last few posts, I've liked to release an interactive demo, something that you can actually touch and feel and mess around with. In this case, it was writing with runes yesterday and the last few days because I've been working on the Rune Editor. But today I was working on something server-side, which is basically to get these runes as written to evaluate. And because that's some server-side programming, I can't release that to the blog because that's a static web page. And I want to keep it that way for now because it's much easier to maintain the blog as a static website. So you'll have to make do with this video demo. You can maybe get this running yourself. I just released the package on GitHub, but I'm not going to show you how to do it yet because this is really just a demo of what I've been working on. So you may notice I'm at localhost 8081/editor, which is a little interface that I just built today. And let me get rid of the JavaScript console here, and I'll full screen this. And you may notice just one difference from the previous editors if you've been following the blog, namely that there is a run button. So let me write something that might actually run. And this has mostly been a prototype language so far, so there's not a lot of stuff that will actually do something inside of CodeSpells because I'm just working on how you write code and how it does evaluate in the most general abstract sense. But there are things that do actually have an evaluation value. Like, for example, this rune for true evaluates, or it compiles to hashtag true, which is Racket's way of saying true. And so if I run that, that's actually a valid Racket code. It should come back with true. And so that actually just ran on the server just now, and it evaluated to true. That's the Racket representation of how this code evaluated. And I also have a rune-based representation of how the code evaluated. Not a very interesting program, it just evaluates to itself, but that is what data does in Racket. It evaluates to itself. So let's do something more interesting maybe. I added this list rune. So for those of you familiar with Racket or Scheme or Lisp in general, this constructs a list. So anything after this will be inside the list. So let's put true, false, true, just as an example. So we can see over here, it's a list, true, false, true. And I should be able to run that, and I get back list true, false, true. Again, it's data, so it evaluates to itself. There's the quoted list format, which you might be familiar with if you've done any scheme programming before. But let's do something a little bit more interesting. So even this language, simple as it is, it does actually have a few operators that we can use to just prove that it really does evaluate to something. So let's take this true right here, and let's do something more interesting with that. Let's use not, and we'll swap that true to a false. So I just need to wrap that in parens here. And so now we have a list of some expression that should get crunched down to data, and two more pieces of data. So if we run this correctly, then we should see this rune here swapped to a false rune, or we should see this true right here swapped to a false, or hashtag F. Yeah, there we go. So it actually ran. So it shipped this, when I pressed run, my browser shipped this code, or rather this code, over to my web server, which I have running over here in another tab. And then it evaluated it to this, and then it rendered out the runes that are equivalent to those things. So I get back my response both in Rackety syntax and in this rune syntax, which I think is kind of cool. So let's try to do something more interesting here. This false right here, maybe we can experiment with one of the other runes that actually does something mildly interesting. In this case, the and rune. So you can kind of tell based on the way I visually designed the and rune that it'll take a true and a false, and it should return a false. Let's see if that works. So I'm going to wrap that and with that false and true, and we should see that this false stays false because and false true should evaluate to false. Let's find out though. Yep, looks like it did. No change. But if we swap this for an or, this one right here, then we should see this turn to filled in circle, and we should see this turn into a hashtag T. Yeah, totally worked. Nice. But of course, CodeSpells is not just about evaluating runes to other runes. That's kind of, I would argue, maybe the most boring thing that I have planned for CodeSpells, but I do think it's cool that it does work. What I think will be much more interesting, that I can only partially demo right now, is something like the build rune, which I've shown a video of how this evaluates in an early prototype. This is the build rune and the small rune. And let me just close up those parentheses right here. One more. Yeah, there we go. So now I have a list of whatever build small returns. Now, you might think of something that builds as not returning anything. It just kind of has a side effect on the world. It kind of, yeah, it raises the terrain in a kind of sphere shape, if you've watched the videos. And that's true, really. I mean, that's the interesting thing that this rune combination would do. But that's not to say it can't also return a value, and if it does, that would be displayed here, at least in this editor interface. And just as a teaser, I have it actually just returning the video of what would happen when you do that in game. Because, I mean, right now we're not in game, we're just in my browser. But this will, if I get to it tomorrow, which I think I will because I'm ahead of schedule. But if I get to it tomorrow, I'll be rendering an interface like this in game, and I should, crossing my fingers here, I should be able to write code like this, cast it, and actually see it deform the terrain. But for now, since we're just talking about evaluation of code, let's just do one more demo of something kind of mildly interesting. So let's see. Oh yes, there's the define rune. Define. And then I stuck in some random sort of just meaningless runes like the letter C. So now this evaluates to, or it compiles, these runes compile to define C, build small. And that in itself doesn't actually have a value to return. It might actually give an error. Yeah, it gives me an error. Let's ignore that. Because it shouldn't be too hard to make it return something, which just means I just need to say C, because now C has been given the meaning of whatever build small returns. So let's run that, and we see that video come out. And one more thing, let's wrap that in a list just for fun. So here we go, list. Can't forget our parentheses. And I'm gonna just add a few more C's just for fun. So we should see, no pun intended, we should see 3 of these videos come out wrapped in a list. Yeah, there we go. So the return value is a list that contains these 3 videos, which were actually stored in the variable C, which I defined up here. So you can see that there's definitely evaluation happening. The definition gets evaluated in Racket, the list gets evaluated in Racket, and so on. So basically this week I built this interface that, you know, lets you code with runes, and today I added an evaluator on the back end for that. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'm pretty excited about tomorrow where I get to actually pull this into CodeSpells and have that evaluation piece actually do something in the game. Yeah, so thank you all. If you've been backing us on Patreon, I really, really appreciate it. This is a dream project for me, and it's only possible because of the backing and support from the people who believe in the CodeSpells project. So thank you.